Have you ever been to Arizona and seen the Grand Canyon in person? It's absolutely massive. It's almost 300 miles long, 18 miles wide, and up to a mile deep in some places. You've probably learned that this steep-sided canyon has been cut by a river, the Colorado River. There is some debate among scientists, but most agree that the Colorado River has been cutting down into the rock and deepening and widening the canyon for the last 5 or 6 million years. In this case, the Colorado River is an agent of weathering and erosion. It is physically and chemically breaking the rock walls into smaller and smaller pieces and transporting them downriver away from their place of origin. Through these natural processes, the Colorado River has exposed nearly 2 billion years of Earth's geologic history. But what is the best way to show all of this history? How do we illustrate the lithologies and ages of the rocks in the Grand Canyon? How do we capture and convey all that information? The answer is geologic cross-sections. Geologists use geologic cross-sections to help them visualize and analyze the rocks in a specific area. These are commonly just called sections. A section is a vertical view of rock. In particular, it is a cross-section of rocks from their top surface to a given depth. They typically illustrate the lithologies and ages of the rocks, as well as their thicknesses and physical arrangement. This image shows you the geology of Sicily. The y-axis is the vertical position, the depth of rock beneath the surface. And the x-axis is horizontal position, the location in Sicily. Note the little inset map of Sicily. The red line in the map shows the location of the x-axis of the plot. It spans from the northwest to the southeast. Geologic sections are usually created from observations taken from geologic maps. These maps illustrate where rocks occur on the surface of our planet. Geologists will also use data collected from outcrops of rocks in the field to make geologic cross-sections. These observations may come from quarries, mines, and boreholes. Boreholes are holes drilled into the earth for the purpose of exploring the subsurface. The deepest hole ever drilled into the earth is the Kola Super Deep Borehole, a 9-inch tube that was drilled by the Soviet Union downward about 40,000 feet, or about 7.5 miles. A geologic section is like a map, and like a map, each section has a key or legend. This legend helps you read and understand the section. Rock lithology is usually illustrated with fill patterns. The patterns shown here are typically used for these lithologies. Sand is usually illustrated with dots. Limestone is usually shown with bricks, and shale with dashed lines. But always remember to check the legend. Geologists do not always use the same fill patterns. A section may also include markers and symbols showing the locations of fossils, sedimentary structures, and other features of interest. A geologic section may include color. If so, it is likely that the color indicates the age or lithology of the rock. As you may recall, To make the study of Earth history easier for everyone, scientists have spent the last few centuries putting together a geologic timescale, a system of chronological dating that relates rocks to time. Rather than say a dinosaur lived between 145 and 200 million years ago, we say that it lived during the Jurassic period. The international scientific community has adopted a standard system of colors for the different periods in Earth history. For this reason, Jurassic rocks will usually be shown in blue. Triassic rocks will be shown in purple, and so forth. But again, always remember to check the legend or key. Sometimes people use different colors for their own purposes. Geologic cross-sections are useful for illustrating strata thickness, tilted layers, and cross-cutting relationships, in addition to erosional surfaces and unconformities. The y-axis of a section is almost always vertical position, such as depth below sea level or some other datum. For this reason, the y-axis is useful for illustrating the thicknesses of strata. This image is a geologic cross-section of rocks in Michigan. The horizontal axis shows horizontal location in the state, and the vertical axis is depth relative to sea level. As you can see, the rocks occur in layers. Many of the strata are located below sea level because they are located underground in the subsurface of Michigan. Only the youngest strata, the Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, Jurassic, and glacial deposits are located above sea level in this area. One important observation you can draw from this section is that certain periods of time are represented by more and thicker layers of rock. The Devonian, for example, is much thicker in Michigan than the Mississippian. Not only are geologic cross-sections helpful in showing the thicknesses of layers, but they can also help illustrate the presence of tilted, folded, and distorted strata. In this geologic section of rocks in Sichuan province of China, you can see that the strata of Chuanquin thrust belt have been heavily deformed by tectonic processes. As a result, they have very unusual shapes. In the Huaiying Mountains, it would not be out of the question to find vertically oriented and folded strata such as these. In many geologic cross-sections, the x-axis is horizontal position. In these cases, the sections are also very helpful in illustrating cross-cutting relationships, such as the presence of intrusive igneous rocks between sedimentary rock strata, or the presence of faults and fractures. In this geologic cross-section from Japan, you can see where the Torigonataki dactite, an intrusive igneous rock, has interrupted the lateral continuity of sedimentary rock strata located around it. You can also see a number of faults that have fractured the sedimentary rock, such as the IT6 and AZE1 faults. Faults like these ones are usually illustrated in sections as thick black lines. Again, we can see these cross-cutting relationships in the field. This is a photograph of an intrusive igneous rock, a diabase dike, intruding a sedimentary rock called a conglomerate. Notice the large gravel, pebble, and cobble-sized clasts in the conglomerate, and how the dike intrudes through it. We can also see faults in the field. Do you see the fracture here? It's pretty big. How about now? Notice how the strata on opposite sides of the fault are offset. With experience, it becomes easier to spot faults and intrusive rocks in the field. Geologic cross-sections are also very useful for visualizing erosional surfaces. Erosional surfaces are surfaces produced by the removal of rock or sediment. They were produced in the past by weathering and erosion. As you know, rocks exposed on the surface of our planet are constantly being broken down into smaller pieces through the process of weathering and transported from their place of origin by the process of erosion. The agents of erosion are gravity, wind, running water, and ice. This image shows you the sequence of events leading to the formation of an erosional surface. At time 1, there is deposition of strata, layers A, B, and C. These layers are deposited underwater through sedimentation in the ocean. During time 2, these layers are uplifted. The strata rise above sea level, so they are no longer located underwater. Because they are now located above sea level, there is no more deposition or sedimentation. They are exposed to the elements gravity, wind, running water, and ice. During time 3, these agents cause weathering and erosion of rock. Stratum C is completely destroyed, and so is part of stratum B. Stratum B becomes truncated. Finally, during time 4, the strata subside. The layers sink back beneath the ocean, and there is new deposition and sedimentation. Because stratum C was completely destroyed, the new sediment, stratum D, is deposited directly on top of what's left of layer B. We call the contact boundary between stratum B and stratum D an erosional surface, as it records when and where the layers were exposed above water and the rock layers like C were destroyed. Another way of thinking about the erosional surface is that it represents missing rock, rocks corresponding to time that we now can't study. Erosional surfaces form during periods of time when there is no deposition of sediment. Not to mention, the strata beneath them tend to be missing and truncated. Rock layers are missing. You aren't seeing the entire history of deposition and sedimentation in these sequences. Erosional surfaces are generally illustrated in geologic sections as wavy, irregular, undulating lines. Often enough, you will see abrupt changes in lithology across lines of erosion, as well as the termination of fault lines and intrusive rocks. In this example, notice how the intrusive rock R was eroded away along with the sedimentary rock layer X. Once sedimentation resumed, the new rock B formed on top of both R and X. We can identify erosional surfaces in the field by carefully studying the contacts between rocks. Geologists can identify ancient erosional surfaces from a variety of observations, including the presence of small cave and karst-like structures which form through dissolution of rock. They can also observe lithological and mineralogical patterns that evolve as a result of chemical reactions involved in weathering. Sedimentary structures and trace fossils produced by plant roots can also help you to identify erosional surfaces in the field. When surfaces are exposed and experiencing erosion, they may be overgrown by plants. Plants will grow on the rock or sediment, further promoting weathering and erosion. In the process, they produce sedimentary structures called root traces. When the rock or sediment is later buried, these root traces may remain, marking the location of the sedimentary erosional surface. It is important to note that not all geologic cross-sections are the same. The x-axis is not always horizontal position. In some cases, the x-axis illustrates grain size. This image shows 3 examples of a special type of section called a stratigraphic column or Strat column. These sections are specially prepared for visualizing vertical variation and relative positions of strata at a specific site. As in other sections, the y-axis is vertical position, and pattern fill illustrates lithology. The y-axis has a scale in meters, which shows the absolute thicknesses of the strata. Importantly, however, the x-axis does not show horizontal position. Instead, the x-axis illustrates grain size. It indicates whether the grains in each stratum are clay, silt, sand, pebble, or cobble sized. Fine-grained, for instance, clay strata, are narrow boxes. Coarse-grained strata, such as those consisting of sand and sandstone, are relatively wider boxes. Let's return now to the Grand Canyon. If we look closely at a geologic cross-section of the Grand Canyon, we see an astounding amount of detail, evidence of volcanoes and landslides in the past, numerous caves, and countless lithological changes. There is a huge variety of rock types in the Grand Canyon. But the 2 most intriguing features of this section are probably the so-called Great Unconformities located near the base, where the Grand Canyon supergroup meets the Tonto group and Vishnu basement. It's fair to ask, why are these considered Great Unconformities? The Great Unconformities in the Grand Canyon were first recognized by John Newberry in New Mexico in 1857, and later described by John Wesley Powell in 1869. They represent 2 of many unconformities across North America located in Precambrian strata. The term Great Unconformity refers to the fact that all of these unconformities represent hundreds of millions of years and potentially billions of years of missing rock and missing time between strata. They suggest that North America was exposed above the ocean for 1 billion years and experienced extensive weathering and erosion during that time. This was enough time for great mountains to form and be eroded away. Part of the second Great Unconformity in the Grand Canyon, the boundary between the Tonto group and the Grand Canyon supergroup, is a spectacular angular unconformity. Do you see it? There was a long hiatus between the deposition of the Grand Canyon supergroup and Tonto group strata. During that time, the strata of the Grand Canyon supergroup were tilted and eroded before the Tonto group strata were ultimately deposited on top of it. The complexities of this geology is staggering. For this reason, the Great Unconformities remain a subject of great interest among geologists. And of course, the Grand Canyon remains one of the most popular tourist destinations in the United States.